Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some people seem to handle pain and life's challenges so much better than others? Or how our relationships might play a role in how we cope? Well, this new study dives deep into that very question. Today, we're exploring a fascinating project that aimed to build a shared understanding of the complex puzzle of pain. It's about how our thoughts, feelings, and connections with others influence whether pain becomes a constant burden or a manageable part of life. Think of it like trying to map out a really complex storm, understanding all the different elements that make it up and how they affect each other. Researchers often work in different silos, and sometimes the people who actually live with a condition, like chronic pain, have experiences that aren't fully captured by traditional research. The goal here was to bring together different kinds of experts, researchers, doctors, and most importantly, people who live with chronic pain every day to create a common language and a shared map of how pain impacts our lives. So, how did they do it? They used a really cool approach. Instead of just asking people to fill out surveys, they held workshops. And to make complex ideas simpler, they used a metaphor, a storm. They called these maps directed acyclic graphs, or DAGs for short. Now, that sounds complicated, but the storm metaphor made it easy. Imagine the storm itself is the impact of pain. What causes the storm? That is like the exposure or the initial pain. What makes the storm worse or better as it goes along? Those are like mediators or moderators. And what are things happening at the same time that might be related but aren't directly in the storm's path? Those are confounders. This storm idea helped everyone, regardless of their background, talk about cause and effect in a way that made sense. They brought together a small but mighty group of people. 4 of them were experts by experience, meaning they live with chronic pain themselves. The other 8 were professionals, researchers from different fields like statistics and psychology, doctors and data scientists. This mix was key. After these workshops, they came up with a dream DAG. This is like an ideal map of how they think pain and its impact work, before worrying about what data they actually have. It is a starting point, a vision of the relationships. What did this dream map look like? It included things like how anxiety and even a loss of identity can be tangled up with pain. It also highlighted how our relationships can be disrupted, and how our broader social world matters. One really significant finding was how disruption to relationships was seen as a sort of middleman, a mediator, connecting the initial pain experience to its ongoing impact on a person's life. This is huge because it suggests that even if we can't always reduce the pain itself, strengthening relationships might help reduce its impact. The big takeaway here is that this metaphor-based approach, this co-creation, really works. It helps diverse groups build a common language and create research questions that are genuinely meaningful to people living with chronic pain. The resulting Dream DAG is a transparent, experience-informed framework for future research. One of the biggest strengths of this study is how they use the storm metaphor. It created a level playing field. People living with pain didn't have to delve into their deepest personal struggles to explain complex ideas. They could use the storm analogy, which was universally understood. And this wasn't just listening to experts. The people with lived experience and the professionals worked together, side by side, to suggest ideas, decide what was most important, and put them in order. This is true co-design, where everyone's voice is equally weighted. This idea of creating a dream DAG first, without worrying about what data exists, is brilliant. It means they could focus on what truly matters for understanding pain, rather than being limited by what we can currently measure. It helps them ask the right big questions. Now, no study is perfect. One limitation mentioned is that they worked with a small group. So they're not yet sure how well this exact process would work with larger groups or in other health areas. That is something for future research to explore. Also, while the storm metaphor was great for many concepts, some of the really intricate parts of how causes and effects work, like effect modification, that is when something changes how strong a relationship is but isn't in the direct chain, were a bit trickier to fully capture with the storm. Let's dig a little deeper into the methods, but keep it simple. They talked about variables. Think of a variable as anything that can be different for different people, like age, or how someone feels. Researchers look at how these variables connect. For example, does having more anxiety mean someone reports more pain? But the tricky part is that sometimes we don't know the direction. Does anxiety cause pain, or does pain cause anxiety? That is where DAGs come in. They're visual maps that help scientists draw out their best guesses about cause and effect. The directed part means the arrows show the believed direction of influence, like an arrow from stress pointing to poor sleep. The acyclic part means there are no loops, so you can't have a cause B. and then B cause A in the same pathway within the diagram. This helps avoid confusing back and forth reasoning. They made a dream DAG, which means they imagined the ideal scenario, the perfect map of pain, before they worried about the practicalities of collecting data. This is super important because sometimes the ideas that are most meaningful aren't the easiest to measure. They held 2 main workshops. One was with the experts by experience, and the other with the academic and clinical experts. They built their DAGs separately at first. In the first workshop with those living with pain, they started by defining the outcome, the main problem they want to understand and change, and the exposure, which is the starting point or cause. For the experts by experience, the outcome was beautifully phrased as pain stopping you from doing what you would like to do. The exposure was the initial pain presentation. They then added in all the other pieces of the puzzle, like how life changes, what support is available, and how it all connects. In the second workshop with the researchers and clinicians, they also talked about outcomes. While they considered things like pain intensity, they agreed that pain impact, how much pain affects various parts of life like social activities, work, or self-care was the most crucial outcome. Their exposure was defined as pain impact at time 1, and the outcome was pain impact across social, occupational, and self-care at time 2. This emphasizes looking at how pain's impact changes over time. Then came the integration. They showed each group the other's DAG. They looked for where they agreed and where they differed. It's like trying to piece together 2 slightly different maps of the same area. The experts by experience, seeing the researcher's DAG, added in details like the importance of uncertainty and how things like medication and its side effects play a role. This shows how both groups enriched each other's understanding. Finally, they merged everything into one comprehensive integrated DAG. This final map visually represents the complex interplay of factors they identified. In this final model, things they considered confounders factors that might influence both the start and end of the pain impact chain, but aren't directly part of it, are shown as needing to be adjusted for. In analyses, this is important for getting a clear picture of the direct links. One of the most profound shifts in thinking, as they discuss in their discussion section, was realizing that people didn't just want to stop pain, they wanted to reduce its impact on their lives. So instead of just looking at pain as the outcome, they reframed it as understanding the relationship between an initial pain impact and its ongoing impact over time. This is a subtle but critical difference in how we frame research questions. They also stress the importance of time, not just the exact moment something happens, but the perceived impact of events. Sometimes a short-lived event can have a lasting effect, and they use the visual layout of the DAG to reflect this perceived significance, rather than just the chronological order. The DAG approach was particularly useful for teasing apart mediators and moderators. A mediator is like a link in a chain, something that carries the effect forward. A moderator is more like an external factor that changes the strength or direction of that chain. They found that things like a loss of identity and confidence acted as internal mediators, directly influencing how pain impacts someone. Really importantly, they clarified that relationships were not just an external factor, a moderator, but acted as an interpersonal mediator. This means that how our relationships change due to pain is part of the pathway that leads to ongoing pain impact. If we can improve social support, even if the pain intensity doesn't change, the impact of that pain might lessen. This implies that interventions focused on relationships could be very effective. Comparing the initial DAGs highlighted differences in what was prioritized. For example, medication use was prominent for the experts by experience, while sleep was more so for the researchers. They found ways to integrate these, seeing medication and side effects as part of the physical state that influences pain. The biggest strength of this whole process, as highlighted in the strengths section, is the creation of a common language. The storm metaphor truly leveled the playing field, allowing for genuine equity in decision-making and making sure everyone's input was equally valued. This approach didn't just produce a diagram, it fostered deeper engagement from people with lived experience. They weren't just participants, they were active decision makers shaping the future of research. This makes the research more meaningful and ultimately more impactful. And this isn't just theory. This dream DAG has already been used. They tested it with real data and found new evidence about how pain impact can disrupt social relationships, especially in young adults. This is a direct result of the co-design process, as that specific mediating pathway might not have been included otherwise. Now, for the limitations, as they mentioned, DAGs can get very complex, and sometimes we just don't have the data to test every single proposed pathway. For instance, measuring uncertainty is difficult, but they identified it as important. And as we said, the storm metaphor, while useful, doesn't perfectly capture every nuance of complex causal relationships. And again, the small sample size for the workshops means they need to test this method more broadly. So what's the overall conclusion? This metaphor-based co-designed DAG process is a powerful way to make complex research questions accessible and meaningful. It bridges the gap between lived experience and scientific evidence, creating testable models that can lead to real-world insights. What I find so compelling about this is the emphasis on code, creation, and shared understanding. It treats people with lived experience not just as subjects of research, but as essential collaborators. The storm metaphor is a brilliant stroke of genius for making abstract concepts tangible. It really highlights that to understand complex human experiences like pain, we need to combine different types of knowledge, the rigorous data of researchers, the clinical insights of doctors, and the invaluable lived knowledge of those who navigate it daily. The fact that this dream DAG has already led to new empirical findings is the ultimate testament to its success. It shows that when we design research collaboratively, focusing on what truly matters to people, we can uncover deeper and more impactful truths. I think the future of research in areas like pain, mental health, and chronic conditions lies in these kinds of inclusive, creative approaches. We need more dream DAGs that help us map out not just what is measurable, but what is meaningful, and then figure out how to measure it. Future work could definitely explore other metaphors for different types of complex problems and test this process with even more diverse groups, perhaps even in different cultural contexts. That's all for today's Mind Lab. What do you think about using metaphors to understand complex scientific ideas? Let us know in the comments below, and if you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. See you next time.